The Zork series. You know, this is an old series. It was originally published by Infocom and later acquired by Activision and they continued it. And this is basically the progenitor of the interactive fiction genre of games. In fact, it's one of the 10 influential games in the computer gaming industry. And Infocom basically, when they first released it, it became 5 games with a sub trilogy called the Enchanter trilogy. But when the Zork anthology was released, did not include those games. It only included the first 5, which were released. Initially, the first 3 were released as one entire game. But with the advent of stuff like floppy disks and all that, uh, being a bit smaller, they relegated it to a 3-part, which was released a year apart. And about the only thing all the games had in common was a shared history, a shared timeline, and that apart from the first 3 games, they were pretty much they're each their own story. Now, when they were originally released, the first 3 games that were released were, of course, Zork 1, Zork 2, and Zork 3. Later, then, Beyond Zork came out, which was their first attempt at creating some sort of interactive or some sort of visual element to go with these games, because the early computer games did not have graphics. And in fact, sometimes in order to deal with graphics, they would use text-based graphics. And in this case, the game had a map feature with Beyond Zork. It also included some random elements. Like certain areas would have a standard build, and other areas would be completely random generated. The last Zork game released by Infocom was actually Zork Zero, which I could say might have had a pseudo map, but you were also given imagery, like a side picture to tell you like where you were. Maybe a little bit of a map. Borders changed, and you actually had some visual problems to figure out. Then the whole thing was quiet, and you had the Enchanter trilogy, which was set between like the third Zork game, Zork 3, and Beyond Zork. Then the series laid somewhat dormant until Activision got a hold of it. Activision had the funds to make this a point and click with the same idiosyncrasies that Zork became very famous for. And they released 3 games. First was Return to Zork. Then they released Zork Nemesis, or the Forgotten Lands. And then they released Grand Inquisitor, which was probably the best one to end the franchise on to date. Now, of course, timeline-wise, the chronology of the games is a little bit different. You start with Zork Zero, also known as the Revenge of Megaboss. And this is what, quote, would be the starting point of the franchise in its history. As it is, you start out playing like a servant at the castle when Megaboss basically puts a curse on them, on the Flatheads. Flatheads aren't particularly the most with it, but it's a curse that will affect the Great Underground Empire. You then resume as an adventurer, one of many who's trying to find all the treasures. You're also trying to, quote, end the curse. And so you have to search around. Now you have your usual, quote, interactions that can, quote, put you in a situation where you are soft-locked. And you have to use some crazy logic. And some actually pretty sound logic. I mean, you enter a temple in which, if they will, you are to make a wish at the end before they kill you. So the trick is to make a wish that will put them into a quandary. You see, if the wish is something they can fulfill, they hang you. If the wish is something they cannot fulfill, they cut off your head. So what's the solution? I want to be beheaded. I think that's how it went. This, of course, confuses the executioner because by right, he could give you what you want, which means he has to hang you. But if he hangs you, he's not giving you what you want. So he would have to cut off your head. But that's what you want, so he has to hang you. And it just makes his brain hurt, and he just tosses you out. But it's a kind of logic that works. Of course, as you're going around and you get everything and then put it all in the cauldron to undo the curse, you have to make one hell of a run for your life and find out that this jester that's been plaguing you the entire game is actually the spirit of Megaboss. And he's like, well, now you're the one in charge. As the castle and everything collapses into a White House. The White House is a very notable structure to anyone who's played Zork because that is how you start Zork 1. You are outside a White House. And you basically become the dungeon master, who is the final entity that you have to defeat in Zork 3. Then in the chronology, you go through Zork 1, 2, and 3. where you must, in Zork 1, must deal with a very clever and very dangerous thief. Of course, you can't deal with him until you build up your levels. He's your last foe to beat. And when you are successful in beating him, of course, but you also need him to get some treasures. So you basically work through, you will have a few creatures that you will have to fight. And Zork 1 really is, the Zork franchise can really be about the exploration. You can also get soft locked, which is, well, it was a problem in early computer games, to be honest. Hence the save early, save often, in case you get soft locked. And a good portion of these puzzles did require you to have common world knowledge. Because sometimes the alternate answer is more productive and sometimes funnier. For example, you encounter a Cyclops in a maze under the White House. You can fight the Cyclops, or you can say either Odysseus or Ulysses. The Cyclops, remember, knowing of the name of the fearsome foe of Polybites, the man that had blinded Polybites, reacts in fear and runs away, crashing through a wall. Hey, you needed that. And it could also be said that that just shows the weird nature of the game. They kept you guessing in the Zork series, because sometimes you could go north to another area, but when you get to that other area, your exits are west and south, are north, west, and southeast. So that's a little weirdness. And you were also given things that you could use alternate solutions on to try and figure things out. But it also taught you to think. You don't take an open flame into a gas-filled area. That's just common sense. And you also get to see such key locations as Flood Control Dam 3, the Underworld, Hades. Of course, though, it relies on your mind to do the work of creating these beautiful images. Now, of course, once you get to the end of Zork 1, i.e. get all the treasures so you can then get to the next part and unlock the next part, you meet the Wizard of Froaz. He is tricky, he is dangerous, and he is good with spells that begin with the letter F, which can in turn hinder you from making progress in Zork 2. You also get a fun room called the Carousel Room, which will constantly rotate and make you dizzy. In fact, until you can stop the carousel from going round, you cannot be certain of which way you're going. And of course, you have to gather things together, defeat the wizard, so you can then move on out of that game. And again, this used some rather off-the-wall solutions, but it was something that you could manage. You even had to do some timing with a balloon as you're in a volcano, a dormant volcano. Of course, once you get done with that and defeat the Wizard of Frobaz and find your way to an endless stairway, you end your adventure in Zork 2. And then you move on to Zork 3, where you finally meet the Dungeon Master, aka you from Zork 0. The Dungeon Master will be testing you throughout the game, encountering you at various different points. And of course, you are to solve these puzzles. Now, I want to stop here and say, of course, that the first couple of Zork games the first couple of Zork games featured points. In fact, I think all the games had points in them, but when you get into the point and click ones, the points are not as relevant to when you accumulate them. I mean, Zork 0 had a 1,000 point limit. Max points was 1,000. Zork 1 was like 250. I think Zork 2 was like 300 and something. And Zork 3 was 7 points. That's it. But as Zork 3 is, you have to solve these puzzles. You do have some randomly generated areas. And of course, with any Zork game, you also have to deal with Gru. Gru was the programmer's equivalent to entering an area without a light. It gave you one chance to back up. And if you didn't take that chance, well, you were dead. Of course, if your light runs out and you're on a balloon that's lifting up, you're screwed. Now, of course, there is something that you could use to maybe dissuade Gru, like Gru repellent. I don't remember if that was in Zork 3 or not. That's what you get when you play a series over a year. But in the end, when you, quote, outwit the Dungeon Master, you become the new Dungeon Master. And that is where Zork 3 would end. So, in the chronology, we have played through, in this order, 5, 1, 2, 3. And, yeah, I had to do my research to find out what is the order that these happen in a chronological way. I like it when I can do the games in a chronological way. Of course, for story-wise sake, it's nice. But then, the next game in the chronology is the second Activision release. Zork Nemesis. Now, this game only has 9 points. 9 points are, of course, getting the elements for the 4, quote, mages that are trapped in this fortress. And then getting the 4 elementals symbols, which are mixed with their planetary alignments. And in this game, at first, you are apparently against Nemesis. And that there is also the spirit of a young lady trapped. Now, the first and easier part of the game is, of course, to get the elements for the mages and getting some of their story. And then you have to go to each of their set locations where you will see some linkage to the girl. I mean, you go to an asylum where one of the sages was the doctor in charge. You go to a monastery where one of the sages was the monk in charge and was also raising this girl. The doctor was treating her for something. The next is the castle of the warlord, whose son has fallen in love with the girl. He also considers the son a disappointment. Blech. And then you go to the conservatory where the girl was learning music. But amongst all these visits, you learn that the girl and the boy had fallen in love and were about to be wed until it was unceremoniously ripped apart. And this is where you learn that these four sages had a plan. In fact, it's revealed once you get all their elements back and they are able to contain Nemesis, who is actually the spirit of the boy. You see, they were going to sacrifice the girl so that they could achieve everlasting life. Well, here I thought that this Nemesis thing was an evil thing trying to, ruin things, and no! These four were manipulating this girl just for the purpose so that they could slaughter her for everlasting life. Ugh. So, obviously, we must now stop them from doing that. Which is our final point in Zork Nemesis. And this game is open in the way that you can actually complete the four sections in any order. I mean, you can't go to the sections until you find all four elements. And then once you go to the sections, and there is actually a way to return to a section if you already visited it already and taken care of everything or don't want to head to it yet. But it just goes to show you that there was some expert storytelling, and they did use some live action actors, because even these characters have their own lot of stuff going on. I mean, the woman in charge of the conservatory and the warlord, they're having an affair. The warlord's wife is already aware of it, but she's not really afraid of anything there. And some of the names that worked on Nemesis do have some sort of background in acting and all that. So they utilized everything right with that game. Then we go back to Zork Beyond, which is set after Zork Nemesis in the timeline. Now this one had an interactive map, and this one had a bit more role-play elements to it. although you could only encounter creatures once in the game. Once you defeated them, they were gone. This was also another one where you could actually soft lock the game. Say if you enter an area and not know you have to do something in the area, you can completely miss something that you need to progress in the game. Which is sad. I only discovered it playing it. And while you can get a general map, and that's one thing that this game does, is it provides you with a map to a general degree. But when things are random, it has to keep them random. So you never know what you're going to get when you enter those areas. You have to find items, have them identified. You find you'll need certain items for certain things, so it'll tell you about that. It still has the insanity of the games, which makes them memorable. And you do have a moment that you have some time travel in. And you have a lot of cute things in there. Like you have to find this ferret. Ferrets are cute. I think it was a ferret. Maybe it was a mink. But you are looking for the coconut of Quendor. Now when you find it, well, there's a bunch of wizards that have it, who are on an ethereal plane. Of course, well, just as you're about to be able to get it, because it rolls to your feet, they ask you to get it, something snatches away, and you're dealing with an Urgru. So now, you have to work your way. You have to get everything you're going to need to tackle the Urgru, access the Urgru, and defeat him. It's not going to be easy. And you're not going to find every point in the game, even if you do use a walkthrough. Some walkthroughs don't even acknowledge all the points that you can get. But it had its good concepts by incorporating a map like that. This was a game that when it was initially designed, map making was paper, pencil, and draw it out, boy, draw it out. Of course, nowadays you have paper, pencil, and you don't need paper, pencil, but it's not a bad thing to have. However, once you are able to find and defeat the Urgru, and yes, you have to get at them, you have to defeat these luck vampires or something. So you have to throw like Lucky Charms at them. Well, once that's done and you defeat them, well, the Urgru gains compassion. And you defeat them and you win the game. However, this entity will take the coconut of Quendor away. Where to? Well, we'll find out in the next, quote, part of the timeline. And this we go to the 8th game released, which is Zork Grand Inquisitor. In a time when magic has been outlawed and everything is basically run by the Grand Inquisitor, who went to the Gru Academy where he would learn magic, and he was complete and utter failure. So, as you are fighting, of course, making your way, magic is illegal. You are in a dictator state where if you're even suspected of doing something wrong, you are arrested, are reminded you have no rights, and must now, quote, so you must undo the damage of the Grand Inquisitor. And this one was nice. It had a whole bunch of actors in it that were big names even in the 80s. Big names in the 80s, big names, somewhat big names in the 90s. Well-known celebrities for the time. I mean, well, the Grand Inquisitor was well, his name might not ring a bell to you. You will recognize him on sight and various things. He was a good for bit acting. You may not know his name, but you know his face. The character of Antara Jack was the actor who played Face in the original A-Team series. The head of the Grand Inquisitor's Guard is Rip Taylor. The voice of the Dungeon Master, who is stuck in a lantern that you find early in the game, that's Michael McKean. You'd recognize him from a lot of stuff. I mean, if you watched Clue, he played Mr. Green in Clue. He was one of the duo from Laverne and Shirley. I can't remember if he was Lenny or Squiggy. If you're an X-Files fan, well, he was Fletcher from X-Files. I think that was his name, Morris Fletcher. So, you have a bunch of characters that show up and actors who are well known, and also the bouncer from the club that you see in the game. That's Ogre from the Revenge of the Nerds franchise. Dave Glib. I think it was, or Gibb. What was it? Gibb, maybe? Oh well. He was a fun little actor to have in there. So you're trying to return magic to the land, which means you have to find 3 artifacts. Stow them in a walking castle. Yeah, there's a walking castle. And get them all together. Basically, put them on the antenna that the Grand Inquisitor is using to power a 5,000 channel television station type thing. And continue with his motto, I am the boss of you. Well, in the end, you get the items, you put them on the tower, and Tara Jack distracts them, the Grand Inquisitor, by telling them, hey, somebody's climbing up your tower. To which you see the Grand Inquisitor do the oh shit run. The kind of run that you find like, oh, no, 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 no. Or like going with like shit, 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 shit. So you do have time. And if you make a mistake at any point, of course you get an ending that's just right out of like the text adventure of Zork, which is nice. Now you don't know what you get points for in this game. I still don't know what you get points for. But obviously, if you advance the story, it's points, and it's more point and click. And of course, this was at the budding time when everything was switching to CD-ROM. So they made good use of the technology. This game was a fine last release of the series. Go out with a bang. And if you do everything right at the end of that game, of course, you do get a bang, which sends the Grand Inquisitor flying. And then we move to the last game in the chronology, which was the 6th game release. It's set longest after the farthest in the future of the franchise, or farthest ahead in the timeline of the franchise. And that's Return to Zork, where pretty much all the adventures set prior are now legend. Some even doubt they are true. And there's an oppressive force in the Great Underground Empire that is abducting people. So you must, of course, defeat it. And they still have some of the wry humor in it. I mean, you got a witch in it named Ita. Yep, Wichita. I think she may be from Kansas. You have characters that react to if you have certain fragrant items on you. And you do have a randomly generated maze. Now, of course, you have to get certain things together. You must work your way to get a disc repaired, which will in turn help you reveal where the bad guy is. You will have games to play, which you must learn how to play so you can defeat the bad guy. Such as this game called Survivor in it. Where one plays knave and one plays a wizard. The wizard can pretty much move wherever he wants. Well, can only move in a L pattern. The knave can move wherever he wants. The object rule of the game is, of course, one must win. For the wizard to win, he must successfully trap the knave, so that the knave has nowhere to go but down a pit. It's actually far easier for the knave to win than it is for the wizard. Because wherever one character goes, a pit appears in the last place they were. Well, no, wherever the wizard goes, a pit appears in the last place he was. So obviously you want to trap the wizard. Of course, the wizard can choose not to move, as could be the same said for the knave. Of course, in the end, you must win. First, you must win as the wizard. First you have to win as the knave, then as the wizard. After successfully defeating this malevolent force that controls the Great Underground Empire, you pretty much restore it to its former glory. Now, this one entry was nice. It had some known names in it. One of which being the elder brother from the 1980s, 1990s series, The Wonder Years. The guy who played, I think the character's name was Wayne. think it was like Jason Hervey or something like that. He played the trolls in that game. Now, of course, this game had its own offbeat logic. I mean, to get part of the disc that you need to repair, you have to basically win a open mic night at a comedy club. Don't ask me how that works. And you have to get the words translated from a joke book. You know, being the last in the timeline, you would hope that was also supposed to be a good game. But the last game released, which was Grand Inquisitor, the previous in the timeline, was actually a far better way to end the series on. But I played them in chronological order, so. But Zork was a series that literally set the groundwork for interactive fiction, slowly embraced other things. Now, would Zork be a nice thing to remake for this day and age? If done right. If done right, it would be a nice revival. But it can be hard to see. It could be fun to see after we could see what the Colossal Cave adventure redone looks like. But Zork, like I said, it was phenomenal. It was breakthrough. It was probably one of the first games that had novels based off of it that are set in the same universe. And I don't know if they're all considered canon or not. I've never read them myself. And I think to find them nowadays, you'd either have to go to a used bookstore or find used copies online. Because that's how hard they are going to be to find. And I can imagine that they'll be pricey too. Maybe. But that's all I'm going to say about the Zork franchise. It was a great franchise. Groundbreaking and set the bar for a lot of series out there. I'm glad I played through all the games. And especially glad since I had only ever had the original Zork games. Zork 1, 2, and 3. On 5 1/4 floppy. Yeah, I'm old. But as I said, that's all I'm going to say about this. I hope you've enjoyed me talking about the Zork franchise. And until next time, I wish you all take care and have fun. Bye all.